Alright, here we go. Gonna hang out, play some Genesis games. I'm gonna try and stick to just one. And the highlight, the feature, isn't the game. It's just something else going on. Playing on Analog Mega SG, I believe that's what they call it. I always forget what their special names for each system is. Fantastic little bit of hardware, though. So just going to be farting around on that. And again, trying to keep my voice down. It's the middle of the night. Yeah, I've got family I don't want to wake up. So forgive the hushed tones. I'm trying to find the balance point there. That's why I'm wearing the headset. Now, I wasn't wanting to wear a headset, but I needed the mic to be close to my mouth to, pick up my voice loud enough that it wasn't overwhelmed by game audio and some of the testing I'd done and everything. So anyway, here we go. And I figured that we would start out. I'm still kind of thinking, yeah, you know what? We are. I'm going to start by playing, start as in this first video, by playing a game that I loved from my childhood. Because I didn't have a Genesis myself, but during those, pivotal, 16-bit era, I guess you could say, my best friend at that time had a Genesis, and my uncle had a Genesis. And really it was my uncle's Genesis that I played more so than anything else. And one of the games that my uncle had, oh man, it's so good, was of course Road Rash. Oh, so good. So that's going to be the game that I kind of fart around with in the background, and we'll see how things go. Something else that might occur is, I have a 9-month-old daughter. She's over there sleeping. She doesn't always stay asleep. In fact, a lot of the time she doesn't. So I'm monitoring her. If she starts crying, I'm going to have to go address her. I'll edit those out somehow. I don't really have editing software proper yet, but I'll wing it somehow. And so if you see any weird cuts, that's probably why. Overwhelmingly why. So anyway, Road Rash. Let's fire this sucker up. And this opening, logo, splash screen, whatever. I have so much affection for this because everyone loves to hate on Electronic Arts these days, and I don't disagree. But back then, Electronic Arts was so great. Because it wasn't just Road Rash that my uncle had for his Genesis. He had a lot of other EA games, and I gotta tell you, a lot of them are my favorite games on the system. Absolutely. Player A, that's kind of lame. Well, let's change this up. Hey Ella, one of my cats is visiting me. Alright, so I'm not even paying attention to what direction I'm going with the letters right now. And that's the other thing I'm curious to see here. This is part test. Because I don't know. I tend to be a very focused individual. I like to focus on the one thing I'm doing, really pay attention to it, dig into it. So I don't know. Do I have the capability to split my attention and play a game while also talking? Excuse me. I don't know. So, one of the things that we're all going to discover together here with this video is, what is this going to be like for me to try and do? And I'll tell you, it's either it'll work better than I'm expecting it to, because I don't expect me to be very good at this, or, well, see, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm not even paying attention to what I'm typing. I just put game. That's not what I meant to do. I meant to put another word in here. Oh my gosh. So yeah, this is just evidence that what's going to happen here is when I'm focusing on talking, the gameplay's going to go to absolute mess. Oh, it's going to be tragic. But then whenever I start focusing on the game, I'm just going to probably shut up and get this dumb look on my face, mouth hanging open, just like, oh, and it's going to be, oh, man. If I get to the point where I really wind up sticking to this and doing this for any length of time, and I get, a few dozen videos in or something, this is the kind of thing I'm going to look back on and just be like, what was I doing? I know it. I almost look forward to it, to be honest with you. Because it's kind of fun to see yourself being stupid, sometimes. Because sometimes you can look back on yourself with affection and be like, oh yeah, I didn't know any better. And then sometimes you really do look back on yourself and you're just like, oh, make it stop. We'll see which one this turns out to be. Okay. Sierra Nevada. Always start with that. By the way, Road Rash, I know it's got a love-hate thing going on between people and its soundtrack. I love the Road Rash soundtrack. I don't necessarily think I loved it right at first. It's one of those things that it grows on you. Yeah, if you come to love the game, you sink a lot of hours into it. Just hit my table. The soundtrack just makes its way into your brain. Come on. And it just grips you. Cognitive easing, it wins you over time. Wears you down. Something I meant to comment on with playing on the analog system here, and also sort of like the very intentionally low effort production right now. Oh, always good to knock Rude Boy off right off the gate. But I'm trying to keep it very basic right now so that I don't have a lot to distract me from just get something made, get something done. So I'm working under some self-imposed restrictions right now. I'm not worried about setting up any sort of interesting, backdrop or anything like that. And, I'm just putting myself in the corner back here. And turning on the camera, turning on, in this case, a game to go with. Ooh, yeah. See, not paying attention as well as I should. And of course the car just takes my bike away. Love that. But playing with the analog system is a part of that. It's I'm following the KISS method to start out. Keep it simple, stupid. So instead of setting up any of my original systems and having to jump through all the hoops to record quality off of those, I'd have to bring my FrameMeister, or the OSSC, or RetroTink, or any of those devices into the chain and be juggling a lot more hardware than two. Really, the analog system, it's, I treat them as plug-and-play devices. I buy the analog system so I have something easy to connect to a modern display and play, with great quality. And one of the greatest things the biggest advantages with the analog systems is, they have very nice accuracy and performance. And 4:3 aspect ratio that works. It's one of the problems with, FrameMeister and OSSC. You're always fighting, do you do square pixels or do you try to do rectangular? But there's no, OSSC is fantastic, but, it's just, I miss proper 4:3 aspect ratio and the kind of horizontal scaling that the analog systems utilize, let me enjoy 4.3 without pixel shimmer and all that stuff, which drives me crazy. Usually when I'm playing in my regular setup, I am using square pixels, just so I don't have any shimmering and other things to deal with. Oop. Now, just to speak to Road Rash itself for a moment here. You know, there I was, you know, again, I'm trying to focus on talking and you know, staying engaged, not just in playing the game. So I was just focusing on the race and everything. As a kid, though, I could care less about the race. As a kid, Road Rash wasn't a racing game. It was a bike fighting game. Like, you see this first cluster right here, all these guys right off the gate. I usually would just hang back here and duke it out with these guys. Uh-oh, my daughter is stirring. Is she going to settle down on her own, or am I about to have to jump up? Ooh, good girl. Don't be faking me out, though. Oh, no, she's moving again. I don't know. This is 50-50. Well, anyway, we'll just let her... Ooh, she's distracting from everything. Oh, no, don't kick the cover. Ooh, got that. Yep. Okay, I'm hoping that worked to pause the video as expected. I'll find out later. I just realized with this mic in my face, when I drink water, it's probably you're gonna get that swallow sound effect. Ooh, don't want to do that. Alright. What the heck was I saying? I don't remember. Well, anyway. Let us resume. Okay, so... what was I talking about? I think I was starting to talk about Road Rash. I'd already been talking about Road Rash. Yeah, talking about like brawling, you know, with the early group and all that stuff. And that's all I did as a kid. I just focused on the fighting. And sometimes, I mean, I'm still all about that. I couldn't, you know, really win for crud back then anyway. Because I wasn't that great at driving. I mean, this starting bike, it's so slow that, you know, the game's basically on easy mode right now. You know, these stage 1 other racers, their bikes are really slow and they're not that aggressive. Traffic's not that dense, races are short. Starting bike is a tank that, you know, doesn't move very fast. It's great for just firing up to play around with the combat in the game. Just fire it up and start cracking skulls. So that's all I did as a kid. Whenever I, you know, would eventually try to do the races properly, you know, I'd gotten a little bit older, I could start to race, you know, somewhat well, but still not as good as, like, say, my uncle. Really what I used to do is just watch him play the game, because he could make it, I'm trying to remember, I know he made it to at least, you know, level 3, or I forget exactly how it terms the different stages and what have you. I know he made it to at least level 3, if not 4, and 4 is the highest I've ever made it. And it gets tough. I mean, one of these days I'm going to push myself to really, you know, focus on the game and make it into stage 5. I can't even imagine what it must be like. Because you're already on the Diablo in Stage 4. You know, the baddest bike around. As far as raw speed goes. And that was the thing. As a kid, you know, we were horsing around with the game, and you could, like, you know, put in the passcodes, and, you know, you'd get the magazines, and they'd have passcodes for, hey, you know, Stage 1 with, you know, all this cash, and then you could just go buy whatever bike you wanted, or whatever. Ooh, he survived. And I remember doing that as a kid, and then just immediately, like, beeline right to the Diablo. And it was completely uncontrollable. One, because I wasn't that good at the game to begin with. But then two, you know, you're in Stage 1, and you're going from using this bike, the name of which escapes me at the moment, straight to the Diablo? Like, are you are you kidding me? It was sheer mad. Even my uncle, you know, it took a lot of practice for him to be able to drive it. Okay, and we're back. Let's see how long we can make it this time. And of course, it completely breaks whatever flow I was talking about, which, I mean, depending on what I was talking about, might be for the better. Anyway. So, yeah, Road Rash. Well, again, I don't remember exactly where what I left off talking about, but long story short, yeah, I've always loved the game, even when I wasn't very good as a kid. And what I really loved back then was watching my uncle play, because he could make it so much further. And the great thing about the way they implemented all the other racers, the characters in the game, yeah, they really do have personalities, and you start to develop relationships with them. Like, for instance, you know, here in this first set, I never liked Biff. Ooh. Yeah, Biff always annoyed me. I mean, he's relatively harmless as a racer, but just, yeah, that smug face of his and his complete BS that he spouts during the little intermission, you know, dialogues just rubbed me the wrong way. But my favorite was a chick that shows up starting in level 2. I think she carries into level 3 and maybe even level 4. It's been a while since I played the game that far, though. But, you know, Angel. Oh, Angel. Angel is a mean son of a... Oh. And I remember... my uncle had developed a rivalry with her, because every time he would be racing, he'd get up to her, and I don't remember what started it. She must have knocked him off his bike or messed up a race or something, but he had a grudge against her. So every time he came across her in the race, he'd be like, okay, I gotta knock this, you know, knock her down a peg. And so he would stay there to fight her. And of course, she fights back pretty aggressively. So sometimes she'd be the one to mess him up, and it just made the grudge grow. It was fantastic. I loved it. I loved watching him either whoop up on her or her completely mess him up. That was really the best, because then, you know, he'd start to rage and the rivalry would grow, and I'd be like, my entertainment's getting even better. Yeah, I loved that back then. That didn't go so well, but let's continue on to Palm Desert. Oh, Leary. I mean, you don't... Here's something about gaming back in the day. You know, we didn't have the internet back then. And just the kind of sheer, utter nonsense that would get spread, you know, around the playgrounds. You know, like tips and tricks, secrets in games that was just the most bizarre and ultimately made up BS you can possibly imagine. But back then, as a kid, you're buying into every bit of it. Because that's where you got your tips from, or from other kids. Either stuff that they had discovered, or a friend had discovered, or somebody had a subscription to this or that magazine, and they had all the information. And it was one of those things. It wasn't one of the more prevalent ones, but there was always the question in Road Rash: hey, can you beat up the cop? Can you knock him off his bike? Now, I'll tell you right now, no, you can't. You just can't. But back then, there wasn't any hard confirmation of that. And so it was ripe for the kind of schoolyard BS, saying, well, oh yeah, you just have to fight them long enough. You have to punch them enough times, or backhand them, or kick them into an oncoming car. That gets them to fall off. Or you have to have the club, and then you have to backhand them with the club. Just whatever. So as a kid, I spent just all sorts of time trying to knock one of the cops off. And of course, never did. But that's what you did back then. And then another little bit of, this one I still kind of act out. I don't know if it's true at all, but on some of the races, you see like the little oil stains or the sand on this stage, kind of in the road, little circles. I think I remember, it must have been a magazine back then, but I had read if you go over one of those, it gets on your tire and it affects your handling. So what you have to do is, if you go over one of those, you clear it off by just jostling your bike back and forth really quick. And so to this day, I still just automatically do that. It's hardwired into my muscle memory. I have no idea if it's real or not. I've never bothered to look it up. Now, let me tell you, this kind of BS, it extended even into the early days of the internet. Not even the early days, into the mid, days. Internet had already been around. Sega Sages had already turned into game facts, and there was still just so much BS being peddled on there alone. Perfect example. Oh my gosh, this used to drive me crazy. If you're familiar with the game Ogre Battle, I loved Ogre Battle. Originally, had found it in a magazine, I don't remember which one, talking about the Ogre Battle version for PlayStation. And I was so desperate, and I finally rented that one and played it on a different uncle's, from the Genesis owning uncle. Another uncle, he had a PS1, and I played it on his, because I was all team Nintendo back then. I had Nintendo 64, screw all the other consoles. But, I'd still play the other consoles. I just wasn't going to support them by buying them, giving them money. But I did rent Ogre Battle and played it on my uncle's PS1 and loved it. And then, of course, after that, I discovered, oh, this is actually a port of a Super Nintendo game, and that was around the same time I was starting to get into Super NES emulation. And so at some point I was emulating Ogre Battle, playing through it on the Super Nintendo version. And again, having a great time with it. But the BS from back then was, how exactly does the alignment in the game work? Because there was this meter in the corner of the screen that tracked your alignment, and different things made alignment go up or down, and then depending on what your alignment was, would affect how the story would go in some sense, what optional characters would join you or not, all these kind of things. And very early in the game, I think it's on stage 3, there's a character that you have to have a certain level of high alignment in order for him to join, Canopus. And back then, I never could get him to join me. It could not do it. And I would go through all the game facts back then, looking for, okay, how do I build my alignment? And back then, the BS being peddled was, you'd have to, you capture towns, in the game, or really this is the thing, you either you take towns from the enemy, and the manner in which you take it can be, liberation or capturing of the town. But basically what was talked about back then was, well, not only do you have this global alignment, all your individual characters have an alignment, and they're in parties, and so all the characters' alignment contributes to the party alignment, and towns have alignment values, and so back then it was said, well, you have to take the high alignment towns with high alignment units, and you have to take the low alignment towns with low alignment units. Now, this almost kind of actually works, because how it actually works is you just want to take the town with as high alignment as possible. All towns, every single one. But you especially want to be sure that you're taking a town with a party whose alignment is higher than the town's alignment. But the higher the alignment, the better in all cases. And so I used to just be pulling my hair out back then, trying to figure out, using the wrong method, a less effective method, and in some cases even an incorrect method that would drive my alignment down. Oh, it drove me crazy. But that was the same that was more confused BS at the time. You want a good example of ludicrous BS, and I'm pretty confident this is BS now. To be fair, I've not gone back since back in those days to really confirm if it was or not. But a lot of the guides back then, websites, forum chatter, all that kind of stuff, Harvest Moon 64. There was this tripe being passed around, in the game as you're playing through. Brilliant idea. A shame that it was never brought forth into any of the later games that I'm aware of. I haven't played all of them because, honestly, after Harvest Moon 64, it was all downhill from there. Except, Friends from Mineral Town, that was pretty good. But it was basically, in too many ways, a remake of 64, kind of. But Harvest Moon 64 had a feature where you had a photo album. And at key events in the game, you would get commemorative pictures to go into the photo album. Wonderful feature. Fun to see what, it sort of triggered like that collectible sort of thing, but in a very charming way. But the thing is, a lot of the events were based on, reaching like certain levels of romantic involvement with the different girls. So, while not technically exclusive events, very difficult to get to satisfy the requirements for all of them at all times. And some of them were also tied to festivals. I'm trying to remember. I don't think the festivals had any like girl-specific things where like a photo was for a festival with certain girls, so there was one for each girl. I don't remember. It's been a long time. Either way, it was one of those things where it was like, well, technically it should be possible to get all the photos, but the difficulty in doing so is enormous. But all the guides back then, and all the chatter and everything was, there's a second photo album. And the way you unlock it is if you get all the photos in the first album. Oh, I thought I'd moved over enough. So, and I mean, like, you have to play a long ways into the game to reach all the necessary points to get all the photos. And I tried. Like, I was so tempted by this, lustering promise of a second photo album that I tried, I don't know, probably close to half a dozen times, starting from the beginning of the game and just working my butt off trying to get all the photo albums. I remember I even pulled my Game Shark in on like the last 2 attempts using some cheats to make things easier, and still I wasn't able to do it. So finally I just said, well, this is obviously BS, and I walked away from it. One of these days I need to go back, just Google it and find out, was it real? Just in case. Just in case. But I'm pretty sure it was BS. Some more Nintendo 64 BS. Legend of Zelda. Now, Zelda had some goofy stuff in it, so you never knew. Like, that whole R-Wing out of Star Fox, it's real. But I remember, and I think I got this one from, it was from the internet, but it wasn't just from, like, some random forum or something. It was like a feature on a website, probably April Fool's nonsense before I knew better. But, I'm trying to remember the details clearly. It was this whole thing where basically, like, in the final battle with Ganon, he would wind up transforming into a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something, and you would fight that instead. I don't remember exactly. It was some wacky nonsense like that, though. But of course, the requirements to unlock this were insane. Because you had to beat the first 3 dungeons. Beat the initial, all of the Kid Link section of the game before pulling out the Master Sword without getting hit even once. So right there, this is some nonsense. And there were some other requirements too. It was like, there were other weird parts to the rumor. It was like, at some point the Master Sword would break and this would happen and that would happen. You'd have to do this. But again, it was at this perfectly naive period for me. I was like, oh, hey, maybe. So yeah, I made serious efforts to try and pull this thing off. And of course the hardest part, the part that you could mess up, was that initial phase when you were supposedly not allowed to get hit. And that was the part that I never quite cleared. I actually got pretty dang close a couple times. Surprisingly close. But I eventually wised up and realized that this definitely isn't real. And even if it is, it's not worth it. So, yeah, it was some real BS. Oh, but you know what? The biggest BS I was ever sold, and this came from my best friend back in the day, and it was some schoolyard BS. I don't remember what year it was, but, Game Genie was where it was at back then. Because we were young kids, we weren't that great at video games. This was still NES only. We had the NES Game Genie. But the frustrating thing with the Game Genie was, you only had 3 codes that you could enter in the NES original version. It took forever to put in the codes, or at least as impatient kids, we thought it did. It's really not that bad. And the codes were always very limited. And we just dreamed of like what another Game Genie could be. And my best friend started messing with me. Obviously, in hindsight, I can recognize this. And started, I forget what he said the source was. I mean, it might have actually been like my uncle works at Nintendo, type of nonsense. Oh, well, I wasn't really paying attention, but apparently we've cleared the first one. That's going to be trouble. Well, I've never gone into stage 2 on the original bike. Let's see what happens. This should be interesting. But anyway, my friend started just telling me, I must have knocked her out, started telling me all sorts of BS about this Super Game Genie. He wasn't talking about, Game Genie for the Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo wasn't even, we didn't even know about that yet. He just pulled the name Super Game Genie out of his rear end. So, I mean, he told me a yarn. just, I mean, I don't remember all the features this thing had. It was basically, you know, what would you even compare it to? I don't know. It was like a magic lamp. It would just grant whatever wishes you had in the video game. You know, you didn't have to enter codes anymore. You just had to tell it, you know, like select which ones you wanted. Which, I mean, you know, hey, fair enough. That came along with, you know, Game Sharks and stuff later. Production replays. But it was like it had this ability to like auto scan the games, and you know, you could just like specify what you wanted. Like, you know, you didn't have to like do a code. You could just say, you know, give me as many lives or freeze my health, and this was standard across all games. You could do it in every game, period. And it could also, it started like, it even went into territory where, you know, this thing had features beyond cheat codes. It was like powering up the system. It was enabling other like 2-player modes and 1-player only games. I mean, it was wild stuff. I was really excited for it. Oh man. Oh, I was so gullible back then. Well, anyway, I sort of rambled on long enough. And this is going to be kind of how things start out. You know, I kind of use playing the game here just as a thing to do, kind of to break the ice, really, to be honest with you. Because just turning on the camera and talking to it, you know, the thing is, I have to work myself into this kind of conversation, and forcing it, you know, doesn't really work as well. Usually what happens whenever, you know, I'd have a, you know, cat ranting kitchen based, you know, episode, it was because, you know, I was playing a game, it had me thinking about something, and, you know, I just suddenly needed to, you know, voice my internal monologue. Basically is what it is. That's what I'm doing, is just recording vocalization of my internal monologue. Ooh. So, I was really using, you know, kind of farting around playing the game right now as a catalyst for that. I don't know. I have no idea how, you know, well or not this really turned out. I'm gonna have to kind of watch the video and see, like, you know, was I talking as well as I hoped? Ooh, someone hit a cow. Oh! Oh! I hit one too. Is that a cow or a deer? The color looked like a deer, but the sound was like a cow. Dang. But, yeah, I'll have to watch the video and find out, because I have no idea. And also, you know, I hadn't used the, what I basically did was, ooh, gotcha. Ooh, this is getting dangerous. Oh, very dangerous. Yeah! 6th place. Best I could do on this bike, I guess. Well, I wiped a couple times. Go to the bike shop. Man, I used to just... Bike shop was one of the greatest things. I loved this sort of inventory shopping in video games back then. You know, sometimes I would just go through a race so I could get to the bike shop and just look at the bikes and just dream. And, oh man, the coolest thing was whenever you would buy a new bike, your character's palette would change to match the new bike. So you buy this one and now you're wearing, like, you know, purple or blue or green, and that was half the fun in getting a new bike too, not just the improved performance, but now my guy looks different. But yeah, I mean, like you start out with these bikes, and obviously, they're all the same sprite with some different colors. And, whatever. They've got a little bit of style to them, just that little flare right there. But then you get to these, and it's like, oh, look at this. Oh, these are cool. But then you get into, oh my gosh, look at this. It's got like triangles and stuff. It's a Lamborghini. Or Ferrucci. Yeah. Now, the Panda 750, I gotta tell you, it might actually be my favorite bike in the game. Because it is really fast, and it handles so well. Oh, it's a dream. But then you have the Diablo. 25 G's to buy this sucker. Could only dream of it without cheats back as a kid. And even to this day, it is a devil to wrangle. It's fast, but controlling it is hard. And it's not even because it necessarily has bad handling. It's because the way the game, the gameplay mechanics handle the turns in the game. Once you start going fast enough, you start to realize, there's something off about how these corners and turns work. And it's not so much that you're going through a corner as it is, the corner sort of, how would you describe it? It's like you go out on the corner, but then it warps back to the center of the screen to complete the turn. And so you have to start to account for that at a certain speed. And so instead of like going through the middle of the turn, you have to offset yourself so that when it snaps back, you're actually, on the road. It's something like that. It's tough. Yeah. This always kind of reminded me of my uncle, the same one that had the Genesis, also had a Commodore 64. I would sometimes get to play on that. And one of the games that he had was like a Hot Wheels game. And I don't remember what the point of it was. I was so young whenever I was playing it. But all I'd like to do was go to like the dealership or something, I guess, and get different cars and then drive them over to like the paint shop or something. And then you could just like customize, your car with different paints and this and that. It was the coolest thing ever. But then, unfortunately, his monitor, something happened to it, and it lost all color, and it reverted to just a monochrome image, which kind of took the fun out of the Hot Wheels game, I gotta tell you. It wasn't quite the same playing it then. But that was okay. He had some other great games that were just as great in black and white as they were in color. My favorite, not when I was so little that I was playing Hot Wheels, but a couple years later, whenever I revisited his Commodore 64, and then I fell in love with Ghostbusters on the Commodore 64. Oh, what a game. I mean, impossible. I don't know. I haven't played it since I was, back then. Maybe I could fare better now. But, at least as far as I was concerned back then, impossible. But still fun. So I would just keep starting it over and doing those initial, just play like the first, 10 minutes when everything was manageable. And then once everything, went to shit, just go back and do it again. So, anyway, digressions among digressions. You know what? Really didn't race a lot. Usually I grind a bit in the first level so I can work my way up to, it depends on what mood I'm in. If I'm going to work up and just buy the Banzai 750, or go ahead and, it's just $1,000 difference. That's 2 first place races in stage 1 at 750 a pop to be able to jump a whole nother, not only another level, but another tier of bike. But this is actually a pretty fun bike to drive to. Let's go ahead and, whoops, gotta remember how to do it. Go ahead and buy this one. And we'll do one more race, now that we're purple. Yeah, Pacific Coast, whatever. so good. Broomhelga. That name always cracked me up as a kid. I always loved how, you would carry over some of the racers from the previous stage, and they'd be ranking in different areas. Like some of them, like Natasha, she actually, doesn't she get better in the later stages, and she starts placing, you'd find her even higher up in the race, but then some of them just fall back. I think Biff does, maybe, and wasn't paying attention. I was looking at my daughter wiggling. Stay down, girl. Shh. And I remember Angel. She fell in the rankings too as you went up. But yeah, there's something we can just ramble on about for this last race. EA games on the Genesis. I mean, you had Road Rash, but then there were a bunch of other ones that my uncle had, and I'll be honest with you, at that time, with those games that I was playing, EA was like my favorite developer. And the other games he had from EA were, he had, what was it, like F-22 Interceptor or something like that? That wasn't necessarily one of my favorites, although I did learn to love it in certain respects. At first I couldn't figure out how to take off or what you were supposed to do, and then it was one of those things, at a certain age, you play the game, you don't understand it, so you put it away. And then a couple years pass, and, it's summer vacation, you're bored to death, and so you start pulling out some of the deep bench games and rediscovering them. And I gotta tell you, it was the case with a lot of the EA games. When he first got his Genesis and some of these games, I'd watch him play them, but I didn't understand them. I couldn't do it myself until years later, and I started bringing these out, and I was like, oh my gosh, these games are like the most amazing thing ever. F-22 Interceptor wasn't one of the best games ever, but it was pretty good. But then you had, like, the Immortal. Now, the Immortal was cool from the beginning because, dude, those death sequences, that's all you needed. That's what the game was. It was the showcase game. You get some buddies over and you're like, hey guys, come check this out. You just fire up the first stage. I could handle the first couple goblins there just to get some gruesome deaths on the screen and impress, my buddies. But it wasn't until later that, I gained the patience, I guess was really the thing, to actually read and pay attention and think and start to play the game, as something other than just an action game. Because that's all I wanted as a really small kid. Just action, 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 action. Give me fighting, give me action. That's it. Shooters, just anything that let me just get to the fighting, and that's it. And so I came to figure out the Immortal later on, and oh man, I just fell in love with it. I've never actually beaten it though. I've made it to the dragon, and I remember like reading the sequence because I couldn't figure it out back then of like what you have to do with the different items and what order to be able to survive and then beat them. But I never could pull off the timing or something back then. Almost got you. And so that's still one of those things. I've got to go back one of these days. Play through the game. Remember how to do it. I feel like I remember a lot of it, but not everything I know. And finally beat that dragon. That's going to be a real crowning moment for me. But then, so just to wrap up real quick, because I mean, come on. We'll go ahead and kill this, get a little bit more intimate. So you had the Immortal. You also had Desert Strike. Oh, what a game. Oh, Desert Strike was so good. And it was another one that I was able to appreciate from the beginning to an extent. Because, I mean, you could jump right in, fly, and just start shooting and blowing up everything. And you could just go wherever you wanted to. I mean, come on, sign me up. That's all I would do. It was like, it was the precursor to GTA in some sense. Because you just jumped into the game, you started going wherever you wanted, and just causing pure mayhem. Awesome! But then, whenever I started, as I played the game and I got a little bit older and a little bit more patience, I'd played, like, the Immortal and figured out, oh, hey, there's more to this game. There's depth here. If I pay attention and read all these words and stuff. Same thing with Desert Strike. I had never paid attention to objectives. But then whenever I figured that out later on and I started doing the objectives, I was like, oh, hey, this is actually pretty cool. There's like a sequence of things you can do, and the game becomes a different sort of challenge and everything whenever you do that, and then you actually get to go on to the other levels without cheating via some means. So that was a great one. And Road Rash, obviously. I actually feel like I'm forgetting one right now. There's one that I'm not mentioning yet because I was going to try and save it for last, but I feel like I'm forgetting one. That's going to bug me. Oh, well, yeah, technically. There is one. There was PGA Tour Golf. I think it was the first one, whatever its designation was. Yeah, I'm not a golfer, and I don't even really care for golf games. Period. It's like, some of them can be more fun, but even like the goofier ones or the more arcadey ones, like Mario Golf and what have you. Yeah, I'll play them with a group, but it's not anything I have any interest playing on my own. Well, I don't know what it was about PGA Tour Golf on the Genesis. I don't know. Again, it was one of those things, I mean, just the dog days of summer. You've already done everything else to death. You're bored out of your mind. And I start playing an EA Sports golf game on the Genesis. And I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I don't know why. I wasn't even any good at it. In fact, I was quite terrible at it. But I would like fire up, what was the mode? It was like, whatever the tournament mode is. I would max out the computer players or something, and then play through it like a full tournament type thing. And I think, wasn't there even like a spectator mode? Like you could just have the computer play, or you could watch the computer turns or something. I remember, I would set up these crazy tournaments, let them be playing out, and I'd be watching them as though I was watching, the actual sport of golf on TV. And that was like the game I was playing. I was pretending to watch golf on TV by watching the video game golf play out. I don't know, dude. You got a little stir crazy during those deep summer days. Or maybe that was it. Maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe that's what got its claws. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I still have a certain affection for that game because of that. Go figure. But then the EA game that my uncle had, that it's one of the most, it's a very cheesy thing to say, but it's one of those games that when I played it, it changed me. It changed my perspective, not just on what video games can be and how they can be and everything, but in some way it opened up my perspective for more things. It made me a bigger fan of, I'm trying to think of the right word to use for it. I'm not quite sure. I might have to come back to this one at some point when I can do it better justice. But yeah, I might have to revisit this point sometime later. But it basically made me appreciate certain levels of depth greater. Not just in video games, it certainly did in video games, but in other things. You know, be it in other forms of entertainment like movies and TV and books and everything, but also just somehow in a general sense of life itself. It was just one of those, again, it's a goofy thing to say and claim, but like a mind broadening thing. And that was Starflight. Oh my gosh, Starflight. There's not enough praise that I can heap on this game. Oh. And at this point, I really can't do this justice right now, because I'm looking. What are we at? Oh crap! Almost an hour. I really can ramble. Yeah, I'll need a whole nother hour just you know just singing the praises of Starflight. It one of my all-time favorite games. It's in the upper echelons of the pantheon, and will be until the day I die. It just is. So I still feel like I'm forgetting a game they may have had. I don't know. I'll probably remember it right after I shut this whole thing down. And speaking of, I should go ahead and shut this whole thing down, because again, almost at an hour. That's ridiculous. Well, anyway, I hope this turned out okay. I don't know if I'm gonna watch the whole hour of it, but I'm gonna at least watch some bits of it and see. Either way, it's going up, because that's the other rule right now. I can't let anything stop me. I have to produce and go. So, however this thing turned out, it's going up on the channel. So we'll see what happens. See how it is. And hopefully, if it is complete crap, maybe it'll get better with some future ones. No promises. Alright. I'm hitting the wrong button. Here we go. Alright, see you guys.